Bill Rogers. I'm with the Rogers Shooting School, Rogers Holster Company. I'm here to talk about the Safariland GLS IWB Holster. It's our inside the waist belt holster, and it's designed after our multi-fit GLS system. So it essentially means that this particular holster will fit about 150 different model guns that all have about the same length from the trigger guard to the muzzle. Today we're just going to use a Glock 19 and unloaded Glock 19 here that we're going to actually talk about. The GLS system has a locking system so that when you take and insert the weapon into the holster, the leading edge of the trigger guard here activates a lock mechanism that swings around, pivots around, and locks behind the front of the trigger guard. You can operate that by your finger. If you just push it in, you'll notice that it pops around and locks place. And if that ever happens, you'll notice you can't get the gun in the holster. In order to clear that, simply take and lift up the unlocking lever here and simply take your finger and push it in the open position. Now this could happen if you put a weapon in that has a smaller trigger guard. As you push it in, a lock, but as you draw it, it doesn't quite clear that lock mechanism, and the next time you try to push the gun in, you'll find that it won't fit. That requires a shim, which comes with the holster. It is, if you read on our will fit list, you'll determine which weapons have the smaller trigger guard, and you'll simply have to follow the directions to put the shim in. But we'll just deal with the larger trigger guards, which are most of the polymer pistols, the Glocks, the M&Ps, H&K type products. So I've got the holster here as it comes complete, but I'm going to take and show you some of the component parts. I've taken the holster apart. One of the things you'll notice on the face of this is that you have these engaging locking members here, two different holes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it requires the removal of the little slab nut that fits inside the holster, and you have your options of either the low setting or the high setting. The actual belt loop that locks the weapon on your belt itself, notice it fits into the same position, and it has the 360-degree canting, and you can put it in either hold position. It also comes with two different features here, and this is to adjust it so that it locks onto your belt the proper width of your belt. So if you look at here, this is set up right now. You'll notice that you can adjust it, and this one will adjust now from a 1 3/4 inch to 1 1/2 inch, and then we have a longer one here that will actually take and go all the way down to a 1 inch. So if you carry a small, using a small belt, you'll use the longer one. If you're using the standard belt like a 1 1/2 inch to 1 3/4 inch, you'll use this particular part. So let's go into the features of the holster. If you notice on the back of the holster, you'll notice that you have two sets of little keyhole slots. And those keyhole slots allow us to put a thing we call an appendix pad. We'll talk about the feature or why it's important. But to put the appendix pad, you'll notice that there's a little receiver spots right here that actually line up. So you line them up in position, and then you give it a twist clockwise, and it locks it in place. So it comes with three different sizes. You have a low pad, you have an intermediate pad, and you have a fairly thick pad. Now the pads, again, are based on where you would carry the weapon. There's two situations that we normally see carrying an inside the waist belt holster, waistband holster. The first one is what we call the appendix position. And the appendix position is worn usually just right of center of the body up front. And if you notice, most individuals are built so that in this area, in the abdomen, below the abdomen area, we go from a heavy section and it tapers down to a fairly narrow section. And the problem with that is that when we try to put a holster in this area, because the body is sloping away dramatically, is the weight of the weapon with the magazines and so forth tries to make the weapon tip away from your body, which is not something we want it to do. We want it to actually press very firmly in this position. So in order to accomplish that, there's two things that we do. First of all is the center of gravity of the weapon is determined by how high and low you go on the holster itself. So if you're going to wear it in the appendix position, since we know that the body is sloping away, we would take and put our belt member in the highest position. And so what this does, it allows it allows it to go down further so that the belt itself is sitting higher on the holster and is putting more pressure toward the top of the holster as opposed to the lower part of the holster. So if we're going to set this holster up now for an appendix position, we would set it up, and I've just adjusted it to fairly close to a straight up position, but you can adjust that and adjust that depending on your actual requirements. So now what we're going to do is we've taken a look at the back of this. We find that many people slope off, or simply because they have an abdomen area that's larger than normal, they'll actually require a little larger pad. Because what happens is, even though we're trying to control it with the belt, the holster is going to pitch away, and so we need something that will actually support it a little bit in this direction underneath, so it keeps the weapon in the proper place. So I'm going to start off with, and this is an intermediate pad, and you simply take it and lock it in place like we demonstrated before. Oh, by the way, I haven't adjusted the holster, so one of the things that you'll need to do is put the weapon in the holster the first time. You'll notice it's loose, and so it comes with a wrench, and we're going to simply take and adjust it. And by adjusting this, we're simply tightening up what we call a frame jack until we take the wiggle out of the weapon so that it doesn't wobble in the holster. Now it's adjusted. We want to take and operate it as we draw it. We use the middle finger to simply close the lever here. So get it close up, and we're going to take and come right into this direction, and as I close this by pushing the lever up, it unlocks the holster so I can draw it out. As I push it in, we're going to push it in until we hear it click. We need to hear that click. So now I've taken and adjusted it in this position. Now I'm wearing a 1.5 inch belt, so all I have to do is loosen this part at the very top and move it in a down position. I just loosened it here. I'm going to take and move this all the way down in the lock position, because that'll give me a true 1.5 inch adjustment. If you don't know what size belt you have, or is close to this, you can put it on your body and adjust this, because we want it snug. It's the belt that controls a lot of the movement. So I'm just going to hold it in the down position. Now the screw that comes with this actually has serrated teeth, and the serration in the teeth, you want to take and hold this down in the position that you want as you tighten it so that it doesn't move. And just snug it up. The serrated teeth will hold this in place and not allow it to work loose. Now we're going to simply just take and pull out the belt, put the weapon and holster in place. You'll drop your belt over the area that it's going to drop in, just like this, and then we'll bring it down and put it in position where it's locked by the top piece that we just adjusted. Now by doing this, we stabilize the weapon. It's stabilized on the belt and it's stabilized in a position. Secondly, is this feature that we talk about here when we put our appendix pad in place, is this appendix pad is a grabby rubber material, and so it tends to stabilize against the body also. So you have two stabilization points. You have here where it's stabilized by the belt, and at below we have stabilized against your clothing, your underwear, or your t-shirt. So now we have the holster in a position for the appendix position, and the draw is simply to take and lift up your shirt, sweatshirt, or jacket, and as you lift it up, you just get a shooting grip on the weapon, and you can draw the weapon. To reholster, simply start the weapon in the holster, make sure your finger is totally clear of the trigger guard, and push down on the back of the slide until you hit click. And now we know that it's in a locked position. So to the draw is just to get a shooting grip on the weapon, push it back in, lock it in place until it clicks in. Now this holster, same holster, allows us, and to get it out, you simply want to take and pull your belt loose from this and then just slip it out. We can set this now and configure this for a strong side or behind the hip type of holster. Now what we're going to do now is, because the body in this area is totally different than the front, because in this case we go from a narrow area because of the hip goes the opposite direction, so it's a reverse funnel. It's a reverse situation that we have with the appendix holster. So the first thing is, we don't need the pad. We don't need the pad at all. I like to use the really small pad, because the small pad gives me some indexing and lock on my clothing. So I use the lowest pad possible. Secondly is that we don't want this in the high position, because of the situation where your body is trying to push the weapon because of your hip, is trying to push the weapon in, we need to change the CG position. So we'll actually take the holster apart and we're going to move it in the down position. So now that we don't have so much belt pressure that's trying to push the gun against the holster. And we have also relieved, and we're just going to simply take the little nut plate and change it into the bottom position. And again, we'll locate it here. And we'll start the screw back in place, but before we get it tight, we need to adjust the cant. So, and this is something you'll have to experiment with a little bit, but I'm just going to start it down a little bit, and then I'm going to figure out where I need to pick and put the cant. So I typically want to carry the weapon for about right here. So take and bring your belt so that the belt is straight down and the gun's at a simple cant. So this is a pretty good start position right here. And again, you want to take and adjust the clamp part that stabilizes your belt. And since I'm working with an 1.5 inch belt, I'm just going to hold it in that lowest position, which is 1.5 inches. You hold it down in position and tighten it where it was. And so now you have this in a position, push the weapon back in the holster. And now we're going to take, and necessarily we typically need to loosen our belt a little bit, because the hip area actually takes up a little more room than the abdomen area. So once I get it loosened up a little bit, I'll simply take and put the holster in about where I want it, and take the belt and bring it up, drop it through the bottom portion, index it in place, and move it to where it's comfortable. So you want to get a position like this. So now the draw is just the same. We're going to get a shooting grip on the weapon, drive the weapon out, and we'll reholster it, get it started, and simply push down until it clicks in position. Now once you've got this adjusted, you might find that you want to take and wear it a little bit further back, a little bit further forward, and that will necessitate you taking and changing this angle so that you get the angle exactly where you want it to hold the weapon in the position. But you'll notice that any kind of movement is now trying to move the belt. And at the same token, the little indexing pad, or what we call the appendix pad, the narrow one, is allowing the weapon to try to stay stabilized. So it does offer a lot of stability when you start to draw. And remember, in each case, we're trying to get a shooting grip on the weapon. So I'm going to come down and get a complete shooting grip on the weapon. That allows me to unlock the weapon, draw the weapon. Upon reholstering, make sure your finger's totally out of the trigger guard area and simply push down on the slide until it clicks in place. If you go online and you look at the 578 series of holsters, they'll also give you some more information about how to change out the little shim technique for the trigger guard, and also gives you additional information about the holster. Thank you very much.